Good morning, everybody. Happy spring. My name is Tom Lautzenheiser. I'm a senior conservation ecologist with Mass Audubon, and I'm joined today with my colleagues in conservation, Jane and John. They will introduce themselves. And our intention today is to really spend most of this session in a dialogue. So we've got a few introductory slides, just kind of setting the stage and presenting some of our experiences and case studies in invasive plant management. And then, the idea is to kind of lift people over the energy of activation, right? To get you engaged with I think, this important work in land stewardship. So, our the great Aldo Leopold's essay, The Round River, he says that, sort of like a doctor in the community diagnosing illness among the community members, the perils of an ecological education is that one walks alone through a world full of wounds. And, I think we all feel that. But if I had a bone to pick with St. Aldo, I would say, we're not alone. Here we are together at one of this great large statewide gathering of conservation practitioners. And, we can collectively achieve quite a lot. So our hope today is to just share some of our experiences and encouragement to help people grapple with this issue that I think we all, once you start to identify invasive plants, you see them everywhere. They really are. Like just on my way here, it's like, oh, there's a whole wetland filled with Phragmites. It's like the same everywhere you go. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind about invasive plant species is that they're just an incredible homogenizing force on the landscape. And in a time of biodiversity crisis and climate crisis, homogeneity is not what we want. We need landscape diversity and and biodiversity. So that great homogenizing force of global commerce and other factors that influence and ecology that influence the spread of invasive species, not just plants, around the world. We want to just kind of push back against that a little bit, recognize the threat, and do what we can to take care of the lands that we are stewarding. So without further ado, this is a new clicker for me, thanks to Jane, so it works. So I want to lay out a few principles just to get us all on the same page initially here. And one is that we have to make choices about engaging with invasive plant management because, the scope of the problem is so enormous that even collectively we won't be able to, eradication can really never be a realistic goal. So just recognizing that immediately puts us into the mindset of risk management and prioritization. So I want that to be something that everybody takes away is that, choose your battles, essentially. Next is our knowledge about these plants and their control methods and how to implement them effectively or most effectively is incomplete. So every opportunity or every chance we have to learn, every action we take is a chance to learn about what works, what doesn't work in your context. So I want people to keep that kind of scientific mindset in mind as they're approaching this problem. And context is key. So, depending on the landscape and the history of a particular plant population and the, conservation assets that might be at risk from invasive plants to things like land trust capacity issues and funding issues. Like those are part of the context as well. So just trying to understand, as much as you can about any given situation to help you plan for success. Because if you don't have a plan for success, what generally happens is you engage and mightily, for a year, 2 years, whatever, 5 years, and then, whether through personnel changes or interest or whatever, you just can't keep that level of engagement up. And within a few years, it's like nothing really happened, which is kind of depressing. So, kind of looping back to the prioritization thing, it's like we want to really engage where we can be confident that we can make progress that's sustainable and be successful. So, you probably are all familiar with the definition of invasive plants. If you're here, but I'll just run through this real quickly. It's not native to the ecosystem under consideration, and the introduction causes or is likely to cause harm. These are self-sustaining populations. They have the capacity to become dominant or disruptive, and that includes subspecies, cultivars, and hybrids, right? So just, I think we all kind of are familiar with these concepts, but we really need to kind of take them on to think about them a little more, and what they imply is that this is a problem that doesn't go away. In fact, it sort of just gets worse over time. And the implication of that is that really an ounce of prevention or an ounce of glyphosate is worth a pound of cure. We really want to do the best we can. There's this whole early detection, rapid response framework or slogan that people say, but all too frequently you just see these plants sort of marching along, and there's kind of a failure to identify or be able to respond to the problem at those early stages. So then you're left with, well, how do we address it when we're already on the upper end of that exponential population growth curve, which is not really where we want to be. So we strive for early detection, rapid response, but we don't always get there. But I think it's really important that we do engage wherever we are on that growth curve, because, again, this is a problem that just continues to compound the longer these species are in great numbers in our environment. So to be considered an invasive plant by the Massachusetts Invasive Plant Advisory Group, or MIPAG, again, non-indigenous, potential for rapid and widespread dispersion, potential for jumping spatial gaps, and the potential for existing in high numbers away from intensely managed habitats. Again, back to what I was saying, these traits really give these plant species a competitive advantage across the landscape. So there's no real place that's safe. There are places that are safer, like an intact forest with a mature canopy and dense shade. That's going to be less prone to invasion than, say, a river shore community that gets frequent floods and disturbance, where propagules will come down in the floodwaters and get established on newly deposited silt and things like that. So some of our ecological communities are much more prone to invasion than others, but no place is truly, truly safe. So we got to understand that and, again, choose our battles. So I have a few suggestions for priority actions. We should prevent the establishment of new populations where we can. And that includes species that maybe aren't like formally listed as invasive, but we think, hey, we've got some reasons to be suspicious about these particular plants. And I received a a pest alert from folks in New York just a few months ago from a whole bunch of plants I'd never heard of before. And it's like, some of them are in Massachusetts already. So it's like, oh, now I'm aware. I should keep my eye out for these. That type of thing is really important, even though those plants are not formally listed on my PAGS list yet or anything. And then where do we choose to engage in the landscape? Well, I think, we want to protect our major conservation assets, and those include locations where there are populations of rare plants or unusual natural communities, and then actively managed habitats. So if we're managing grasslands, managing shrublands, that disturbance, that highlight environment can often promote the propagation of invasive plant species. It's really, part and parcel of an active management approach to try to deal with the invasive plants that are established or could potentially be established because of that management. And then lastly, we want to focus on restoration. So again, choosing the places in the landscape where you're most likely to succeed and feel confident in your ability to sustain what's needed to make gains, to get in there and restore those areas back to native vegetation communities. So how do we do that? Well, we've got a few tools in our toolkit, and I think it's important to think of this in terms of an integrated pest management framework where, generally speaking, it's going to be a mix of these approaches that's going to be have the best long-term efficacy. So those include physical controls, chemical controls, biological control, and cultural practices or cultural controls. And, I think one thing for a lot of land trust folks, for practical and maybe societal reasons, we're reluctant maybe to engage with chemical control practices. But I think likely, to me, that's sort of cutting our nose to spite our face, because chemical controls really are extraordinarily important tool in the toolkit. And I know there's a lot of concern about glyphosate use, and they say, it's glyphosate affects bees and glyphosate affects soil organisms. It's like, well, what else affects bees and soil organisms is the complete dismantling of the ecosystem by invasive plant species. So again, in a risk management framework, sometimes you need to get in there with some chemicals to deal with these problems, in my opinion. So anyway, it's never usually one practice that's going to get you there, though. Well-established shrub populations, you get in, do mechanical controls, weaken the root systems, then do a chemical control. Ideally, to me, biological controls are really ultimately kind of where we want to go, but we need to buy ourselves time for, agencies and universities to develop those tools safely and responsibly. So anyway, it's a toolkit, and use the tools that are appropriate for your situation. So with that, I will hand it over to Jane, and he's going to run us through case study.
All right, is this on? Hi, everyone. I'm Jane Maloney. I work for Sudbury Valley Trustees as the land steward, and I've been there for about 3.5 years, which is kind of a small blip in the conservation and habitat management timeline. But I have spent most of those 3.5 years at Smith Conservation Land doing a lot of invasive work. So I'm going to give you all kind of the quick rundown of the project and how we're kind of using some of these toolkit options to manage invasives here, because it's one of the properties that we've chosen as our battleground against invasives, and we are attacking from all fronts. So just a quick property overview. We acquired the property in 2019 as a joint effort between SVT and the Littleton Conservation Trust and the town of Harvard. We own 48 acres, so a pretty big chunk of land, all of which has some form of invasive infestation on it. And this property is really important to the overall conservation landscape because it's not just the 48 acres, it connects to a larger project area of conserved land, a lot of which is biomap core habitat and priority habitat for endangered species. There are also 3 certified vernal pools on our property, and it has a lot of unique natural landscapes that are just really enjoyable for visitors and kind of the recreation aspect of our work as well. Here's some fun photos before we get to the invasives. We have our yellow-spotted salamanders, some bobcats, black bear. There's some really beautiful wetland resources. There's a ridge that goes along a pond that has otters in it. It's a really, really cool property, so we want to make sure we're protecting it. And the bad stuff, pretty much every invasive species that we have in Massachusetts is somewhere on this property in different levels of abundance. Last year, I found a patch of knotweed, which was new, which is really disappointing. So bad news for the property and bad news for all the wildlife and the ecosystems there, but kind of an opportunity for us to experiment with all these different tools in the toolkit and kind of gauge their efficacy, gauge the effort, weigh the pros and cons of what managing invasive looks like at this scale. We even have hemlock woolly adelgid, which is harder to manage, so won't really talk about that one today, unfortunately. So this property is kind of unique for us in that it's a really multifaceted approach. A lot of our properties, we are choosing one method of just mechanical control and going with it. Here, we're kind of throwing everything at this property. So our overall goals are just to reduce the abundance of invasives, particularly bittersweet, because that's our big offender there, and improve the forest health, and then also evaluating the effectiveness in keeping really good data on our control techniques, because we've been finding there's just not a lot of long-term data on what's working on these properties. So we're trying to do a really good job of doing our plant surveys, like logging our hours, seeing how long things actually take so that people have an idea of what it takes to manage the invasives. And this map is just the breakdown of our management areas, all the wetland buffers, the vernal pools, all the things to take into account when we're thinking about what to use where. So just kind of I'll do the quick run through of all of our treatment areas. So chemical treatment, we have done both large scale foliar application and kind of a smaller scale cut and paint application of herbicide. The regional land trust benefit of this is that we have the money and the partnerships to do these kind of applications. And the kind of capacity lift from us for this kind of application is really low. So we're handing it off to a contractor, which is great. The downside is that it comes with a different kind of social management and outreach and talking to neighbors and taking their concessions into account and what do they want to see with the herbicide application, because it is next to a couple house lots, this property. But this has been super effective in controlling the large populations of bittersweet on the property, and we chose very specific areas in which to do this so we weren't affecting our wetland resources or our vernal pools or the residential wells on the property. And then mechanical removal and clearing, this is our kind of newest approach here. So one of the stands, which actually technically not invasive, but non-native red pine to the area, doesn't really thrive in our ecosystem. We had a lot of dead and down trees, hazard trees, a lot of native species or more beneficial species that were struggling. So we actually just cleared an entire stand of red pine. And the intention here was to remove the non-native or non-thriving trees and create a more resilient forest ecosystem, and also kind of allow us to get at the invasive regrowth better. So we were trampling through all these dead red pines, having a really hard time getting to the bittersweet and the garlic mustard. And now we have this open field where we can monitor the regrowth, more effectively treat the regrowth that's popping up. So this was about 7 or 8 acres of cleared land. And it looks like, this is a little outdated, it kind of looks like this now. We have to do a BioBlitz this spring to see what's growing back, and that's part of our monitoring. Again, contractors cost a lot of money. We have a little bit more wiggle room with the money as a regional land trust, but for smaller organizations, that's a big block to these kind of projects. And then my favorite, what I spend most of my time doing in the summer, the manual removal of invasives. So this property, we set aside certain plots and a certain wetland buffer area to do actual manual removal, bittersweet root excavation, and mostly herbaceous removal of invasives. So last summer, we spent about 350 staff hours out digging out invasives. So it's a lot of work. We've seen really good success with the root excavation, specifically in years where we don't get a lot of rainfall. There's very little regrowth of the bittersweet throughout the season. And the downside is the time commitment. You need the staff, you need the capacity, you need to have people who are willing to go crawl around in the dirt and dig out invasive roots until they get to the little tiny ends of the roots. You can see in this one picture that root, I think, is about 15 feet long, and they excavated it from one bittersweet plant. So it's very time consuming, not really a feasible approach for large scale management. If you have a small patch of bittersweet on a property, it's great to think about doing this, but we are kind of doing it more as an experiment to see the effectiveness of this root excavation technique and keep tabs on the results of that.
Could you briefly just explain what that means, root excavation?
Yeah. Yeah, so when we do bittersweet, people are always like, okay, we're pulling it out. And I'm like, no, we're excavating the roots. So you go to the bottom of the plant and you're carefully digging out around the roots and you're following them. And sometimes they start out, huge, but sometimes they're like teeny tiny. And you follow them until they're basically like little spaghetti strands. And that's when it's considered safe enough that there'll be no regrowth. So sometimes it's really long roots, sometimes it's, a couple feet, but a lot of the time we're digging out vines that are very mature. So it's a lot of following and digging. And then if you get 6 inches down, that's kind of another stopping point. You can call it when you're 6 inches down. So a lot of digging, and you're going under other tree roots. You're trying to preserve things that are good. It's very time intensive. That's what we have our seasonal person for. And then we have some of our alternative treatments, and these are very much more for experimenting and seeing how they work on different types of invasives. So some of the things we're doing in the areas that are a lot closer to the house lots, you can see the house in the background of that top picture actually has a daycare attached to it. So we have no herbicide use anywhere near that house lot. So we decided to do some cardboard and plastic solarization, or cardboard smothering, plastic solarization, to see how that would affect our invasives here. And it's kind of TBD. We're still down. We've been going and chopping off any regrowth through the cardboard. And so far, the plastic has not really had regrowth through it. Nothing is really poking through. But that's kind of our current project. And our plan is to do some reseeding on top of that so we can have some natives fighting against the invasives that come back. Yeah.
And what were you covering?
Pretty much everything. Bittersweet, some knotweed, a lot of herbaceous. We have narrowleaf bittercress, garlic mustard. I think those are the big ones down there. And the downside is that we're also killing native plants, so that's something to consider depending on where you're working. This is kind of a small portion of a larger field, so we're not so concerned about the overall impact of killing the native plants here. It's, again, more of an experimentation to see how it goes. And I think reseeding afterwards is going to be really important. We're going to bring back a lot of the good native stuff. So yeah, even the knotweed actually hasn't poked through, which I'm very surprised about. I think it has to do, we put it down during a drought year. So I think that was helpful in kind of suppressing the initial growth. And then some of the other things that we've explored are animal control. That I think is more of like a PR fun social thing because it's not going to have a very huge impact, and we haven't been able to find the appropriate insurance for having animals root around on our property. That's been a concern, so we haven't really done that yet, but it's been brought up a lot to bring in goats or pigs as invasive control, which is really fun and kind of a good educational opportunity, but for large-scale, long-term control, probably not going to do a whole lot. Yes?
You done with carbon starvation?
Yes. Yeah, so the carbon starvation that we're referring to here is repeated cutting. And that has worked pretty well. Again, during the drought for bittersweet, we've done it for bittersweet in a 0.5 acre test plot area where we go in twice a season and cut in the beginning, and then we cut the regrowth later in the season, right to the ground. And the first year was during that big drought year we had 2 or 3 summers ago, and we saw almost no regrowth, which was really incredible. And then the next season, it kind of carried on where we were just going around finding little plants from the seed bank. So if you can plan for the drought year, if you can check out the drought forecast and see what the rain's going to be like, I think the carbon starvation has been.
Anything besides the bittersweet?
Not yet, no. Yeah, just the bittersweet. That's our main offender here. We have 22 acres that are heavily infested with bittersweet, like climbing up the trees, pulling down branches. So it's our main focus.
Have you found a difference between different types of cutting, whether that's mowing or cutting with loppers and removing?
I'm gonna say no. I mean, I think when mowing, you see a lot more like very shoot regrowth as opposed to just coming out of like the one spot you cut. But I think as long as you're not mowing when there are seeds on the plant, obviously, I think it would be a pretty comparable. From my experience, the bittersweet cuttings like aren't rooting on their own somewhere else. It's all regrowth from the plant that's left. So I think that would be, yeah.
So what do you mostly do with the material you take out? Do you
Great question.
Really?
We leave it on site. We leave everything on site.
Remove?
Not really. No, I mean, we keep, well, I bag knotweed. So bittersweet, we keep all on site. We pile up. That way, at least if there is some regrowth or seeds on the things we're pulling, we have kind of like a pile that we're attending to. Knotweed, I bag and then let kind of desiccate in the bag for however long I forget about it for, probably like a month or so, and then we trash it. Yeah. And it depends on, disclaimer, talk to your town about disposal. Don't do anything that I'm saying just because I'm saying it. You should talk to your town about what the appropriate disposals are for invasive plants, because every town regulation is different about if you can compost it, if you can throw it away, if there's like an incinerator, they might have different options. But I think the safest bet is keep things on site. If you cannot move invasive plants from one place to another, that is the ideal situation, but not always possible. And then kind of the final step of all of our projects is the long-term monitoring. And this is the part where the staff capacity really comes in. We spend a lot of time doing vegetation monitoring, doing like very intense surveys of the places we're doing the invasive control to see what's growing back. Is it invasives? Are native plants coming back? How much of each plant is sprouting? So that's something that we have capacity to do as a regional land trust, which is great. And it is really important, I think, to establishing the efficacy of these control methods. And it's kind of a breakdown of our advantages and challenges. I put staff capacity and volunteer pool in both columns because we have staff, but we also own almost 200 different properties and conservation restrictions. So we have to choose our battles, like Tom was saying. And then volunteer pool is really important. I'm trying desperately to get more volunteers involved in our bittersweet battle, but it is really hard to get people on the long-term train for bittersweet. So yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword where we have the volunteer pool, but keeping them engaged, keeping them active is very hard. Yeah, and I think really the most important part for kind of sharing the efficacy and sharing the information is having other resources, other land trusts to talk to. So the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Area for the Sudbury, Assabet, and Concord River watershed group has been really great for sharing ideas, sharing successes, sharing challenges, and kind of getting that regional perspective on what other people are doing. Because like I said, you can Google how to get rid of bittersweet and get a million different results, but having that regional perspective and having people in your area doing the work is very helpful. And that's my part. And I'll hand it over to John to talk about a volunteer land trust perspective.
Morning, everybody. I'm John Sangermano. I'm a stewardship lead for our Stow Conservation Trust. Stow is just a little bit west of Concord. We wanted to show our story of how we've handled invasives, and it's a bit of the optimistic side in that we've taken on a lot of work with volunteers and had some degree of success. But overall goal is to encourage people just to go, not to give up as it's too much of a mountain. So our land trust, we're 48 years old, a long-term land trust. Volunteer run, we don't have any staff. So part of our issue is we have to make things work financially. A starting point, which I wanted to say is not always a given, is that I've been on the board of directors for about 10 years and 6 years leading stewardship. And coming in, there already was an existing volunteer crew. So that's sort of cheating if you don't have one, because it's, but we came in with maybe 50 people on an email list and 20 people who are active and 8 people who are the real warriors that show up all the time. We have one work day a month. We have every parcel we assign a steward, and the steward is important because the steward, it's very prestigious. You can tell your family that you're a land steward, and otherwise you get sucked into doing a lot of extra work because you're in charge. We have our land trust. Overall size, we own 10 parcels. We have 433 acres. And again, it's cheating. We didn't have any real bad areas. We don't have like the Smith parcel that Jane talked about. And we started off with people with awareness, and we've learned. People learn, and we get people who've stuck around for a lot of years, and they build up an expertise. The picture over here is a pulling project for bittersweet, and it's just one of our work results, and sort of answer to one of the questions. What we do is when we're going to work on an area is we lay down some dead branches and then pile everything on there so what we're piling on can't touch the ground, so if we're yanking roots, the roots can't get reestablished. So what did we do? We did have some planning in 2020. We said, let's do this a little more focused manner. I had a grant that was an impetus from the Suasco version of the SISMA organization. I picked a Forest Service plan and adapted it. We had overall goals, like we know the forests are so important. Stow has a lot of forests. We've done a climate model that says the forests compensate about 23% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So we've got to keep the forests growing healthy. We looked for a way to have it measurable. I think that was important. If you just work and endlessly work, you don't know whether you're winning or losing, and made a commitment to doing some long-term monitoring. And again, advantage of having a steward that can be on site. Those are a list of offenders, different parcels. As we looked at parcels, studied them, we saw some parcels had, for instance, one parcel, burning bush capital. I don't know why. It's 8-foot high burning bush. Another property, no burning bush, but a lot of barberry. So it's a good study into getting established. So our approach, we picked our first parcel. do a good detail of it, find where's the invasives. We did a mapping. I'll show in what we did. It was an informal method. There are people with more skills that would map it on their GPS or coordinates. We've tried a few things, but in the end, we did a low tech version of mapping where they are. For a site where we saw invasives, we did a simple rating. Was it really dense? Was it mild? Was it just an occasional? And eventually we get some areas that we think are controlled. So we come up with a way to score it. And then had work days and you trained our volunteers and our stewards. And again, I'll show some of our scoring. What's important, before you start, really got to know where your parcel is. It sounds simple, but there are some areas where people are very sensitive if you step over the line. So we're careful about that. We're careful about where the wetlands are. Our Conservation Commission would say they're going to do it properly. They don't want us doing any mechanical pulling within a wetland without a filing. Setting an expectation that it's not a one and done. And we try to promote what we do in Stow, and the idea is you get individual homeowners, whether it's just if people have a lawn in some area but some open land to work on that open land to pull out their own invasives. Our volunteers, we want to get them to become local experts. The more they do it, the more they'll learn. And the stewards are really important because, as talked about, if you have a new species of invasive that shows up, if you have a steward that is out every month, they're going to notice it first. And I think it's really important in our model. How I score results, we have certain areas that say a victory. We started with bittersweet climbing trees and burning bush taller than me, and you go there now, and the only bittersweet is less than a pen. It's just little tiny things that grow back. There's no burning bush. You can look in the ground and recognize them. So those are sort of victories. We have other areas. Japanese knotweed's really tough. We dig it. We cut it repeatedly. We're really mean to it. We had the drought years, and then I especially relished cutting and digging during those drought years, and it was really on its back for a couple of years. But it's springtime, so they'll be coming up to say hello again. So we knew that's tough. We do basically pulling, so it's dig out to soften up roots, but pulling, they're all kind of different. Burning bush, we have a big weed wrench to get enough leverage and yank it out. A couple of autumn olive, cut it and dig out a little bit, and then we use the come along to pull it out. It's really a battle. Some things, garlic mustard, is just diligent pulling. We have a pond with aquatic water chestnut. Water chestnut is really nasty looking nut that is on the bottom of a freshwater pond, and it grows a stem and makes a lovely plant. And if you pull it out in June, you get a plant at the bottom that has 12 seeds to be, and it yanks out easy and you get fully muddy, and it's a lot of fun. But if you don't get it, that one plant makes 12 nuts, and the 12 nuts are going to make 144 nuts, so it's so we have made progress in all the areas that we've targeted, with the exception of the knotweed is just happily there. The aquatic chestnut, the area of the pond we work the most, is almost free. We have a new issue with Phragmites, which is a problem because it's growing in wet and we're not allowed to work without a filing, and we're unsure whether we want to take that on filing wise. Problems, limits. It seems like everything has to be done end of April, May, June. And it's like, well, you can't do everything at once. In our town, we have Springfest in May. There's Memorial Day weekend in May. There's town meeting is now a Saturday in May. You have to, if you have a mother, there's Mother's Day in May. That's a good activity to earn favor. Go away for Mother's Day. Some things, garlic mustard, you know, when it starts to flower, it's just easy to yank it out, and there's no seeds yet. But if you miss it, if you're busy, if it's raining, and then you got plants with seeds, and now that's just a monster because you can bag them, but it's just, you got this window, you got to do it. I try to tell volunteers how much fun it is, new volunteers, but like midsummer, we have these biting flies, and it's hot and it's humid, and it's like, it's hard to recruit anybody or to get them to ever come back again. Water chestnut pulling, we had, was it 2 years ago where it rained every weekend? So it was like, it was difficult to coordinate people and volunteers. We have volunteers, but it's, you know, we're going to build a boardwalk and 30 people were interested, and then we're going to pull invasives in the wet, and it's like, oh, well, I'm busy. I got something to do. We talked about herbicide with our land trust. We had a couple of years of debate, but we adopted a policy. We can use it. I thought I would be the volunteer. I took the state applicator license exam, and then I said, okay, time the metal hit the road, and our insurance company said, well, gee, I think the quote was $1,400, and then it's like, show us your training plan for employees, and we're like, well, we don't have any employees, and it's like, no, it looked like OSHA stuff. There's a list of stuff, a storage plan, a training plan, a safety plan. I think basically they didn't want us to do it, you know. So we know herbicides is an effective way. It just doesn't work very well. The picture on the left, by the way, is what the plant looks like, the water chestnut. It's a very pretty rosette, and you yank it up, and like 6 feet down is this nasty thing. The one in the middle is barberry. Barberry is very nasty because when they're really big, you can't grab them, and a weed wrench doesn't fit on them, and they're just tough to deal with. We thought about doing flame weeding, cutting them and then blasting. But my colleagues were afraid I was going to burn the forest down. So we haven't really tried it.
It's effective.
But I think it does,
You
yes.
just have to have swatters, people ready to put it on.
Yeah.
So we have like a big patch of arbory that we haven't gone after that yet, you know, and other things. But I look at it, like, can you go in there and cut it? Like, it's really brittle when you try to pull it out, it just breaks. But the roots are easy to find because of the color.
Yeah.
Can you go cut it short so you're not like surrounded by thorns and then yank it out? Have you tried?
Yes, that's the method you would do it. Cut it so you have just a stem. But still, if it's a multi-growth,
Yeah.
you can't wrap around it. And even putting again the come along,
Yeah.
you end up spending so